So today, Andy shared with us this message about a man named Zachariah and how he was struggling to trust in this promise from God. He was struggling to trust in this good news from God. And every week in Advent, we are actually talking about the good news of Jesus being born into the world and the good news that we receive from that fact that Jesus has come. And we're looking at basically why does it matter that Jesus was born? How does it impact our everyday? And we're looking at a different gift each week of Advent. And so let's open this up and let's look at another gift that we receive. More good news that we receive by Jesus being born into our lives. So let's look at this third week of Advent. What do we get? Joy. Now, in our message that we are talking about, our memory verses that we are reciting each week together, we actually talk about joy. So why don't we recite these words together? This is from Luke 2, verses 10 through 11. Let's recite these words as we start to reflect on what is the joy that we receive from Jesus. So these are the words. It says, "But the angel said to them, 'Do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Today in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord.'" Now, think about those words, that this message from the angel, that there's this good news, is actually going to bring joy for everyone. But what is joy? I mean, when I think about joy, I think about happiness, like the idea of feeling happy. I mean, like a sunny, warm day where you get to have the best day and you get to have fun and you don't really have worries or problems and nothing's really going wrong, right? That's like the feeling of being happy. But is that really what the angel meant? That we would just feel happy all the time? Well, I want to give you a little example, an illustration to show us that there's a difference between feeling happy and having joy. So let me show you. Let's imagine that this balloon here is our happiness, and this balloon is joy. They look very similar on the outside, but one of them is very, very different and responds different to different situations. So let's start with our happiness. What happens when we face something hard? Let's imagine that this candle represents something hard or a bad day or a troubling situation. Maybe something's not going your way or you're really struggling. What happens to our happiness? It pops. It goes away. It disappears. You see, our happiness is dependent on our situations and what's going on around us. Now let me light my candle again and let's look at what happens to our joy. Is our joy dependent on how our day is going? What life is like? What happens to joy? So I'm going to do this again. I'm kind of nervous, you guys. What's going to happen? Am I going to get popped? Now let's look at this balloon. This one's different. You see, this is talking about being filled with the joy that we receive from God. So what happens when joy experiences hardships? Ooh, do you guys see? What? Nothing's happening. You see, we can still have joy even if we're going through something hard. Our happiness is fleeting. It can disappear. It can go away just because we're in the face of something really hard. But joy, it can still be there even when we're going through something hard. That's because joy is different. Joy is actually a choice that we have to trust in the hope and the promise that we receive from God. When we trust in this good news that Jesus, He has come to be born into the world, to trust in the hope of what Jesus is doing in the world, what He is doing in our lives. Now, it doesn't mean that we ignore our pain. That's not healthy. It doesn't mean that we pretend like we're okay, even if we're not. It doesn't mean that we act as if we don't have any problems, because we all have bad days. We all go through hard stuff. But the difference is that when we have joy, we actually are choosing to trust in the hope that we receive from God, the hope of knowing the promises of who God is and what he is doing in the world. And so today, as we light this candle of joy, I want to invite you to pause and reflect on whether you are putting your trust and your hope in who God is. Do you have joy? For some of you, you've never chosen to follow Jesus. Maybe you're afraid. Maybe you didn't know that Jesus wanted to offer you this joy. And if you've never chosen to trust God and you are craving that joy that's very different than just feeling happy, today you can just stop and pray and tell God, I want to follow you. I believe who you say you are. I may not have all the answers, just like Zechariah. I may be confused and I'm not sure how you're doing all of this, how you're going to help me. You may not even understand all the details, but you trust in who Jesus says he is, and you want to put your trust and you want to have that hope and that joy. Today you can pray and just tell him, and God can fill you with that joy that can be there even when you're struggling. Now, for the rest of us who've chosen to follow Jesus, today I want us to just pause and remind ourselves of this hope. Today is the third week in Advent, and we are lighting a special pink candle because it reminds us of our choice to trust in God. It reminds us of the joy that we receive from him, of this good news that Jesus was born into our world and he changes everything. So today, let's just pause and reflect on the joy that we have, and let's today choose to have joy as we light this next candle in Advent.